It was a late autumn evening when the knock came at my door. I remember it vividly because the air outside had carried that crisp, smoky chill of leaves burning somewhere in the distance, and I had been curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of hot tea. My name is Daniel Harris, and up until that moment, my life in our quiet little neighborhood had been steady, predictable, and even comforting. But when I heard that knock, everything shifted, and a mystery began to weave itself into the fabric of my ordinary life. My neighbor was a man named Robert Miller. He had moved into the house across the street about 6 months earlier. I didn't know much about him beyond the occasional wave when I saw him tending to his lawn or carrying groceries into his house. He seemed polite, maybe even a little reserved. There was nothing unusual about him, at least not that I noticed. So, when I opened my door that night to see Robert standing there with a pale face and an anxious look in his eyes, I knew instantly that something was wrong. "Daniel," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need your help." Those 4 words caught me off guard. I wasn't the kind of person who often got pulled into dramatic situations. My days were filled with routine, work, home, books, and quiet evenings. Yet there was something in his tone that made me set my book aside and open the door wider. "Come in," I said, and Robert stepped across the threshold, glancing nervously over his shoulder as though someone might be watching. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he stood near the window, peering through the blinds before finally turning to me. "I know this sounds strange, but I think someone has been watching me," he said. At first, I thought maybe he was exaggerating, maybe even imagining things. But the way his hands shook, the way his voice cracked, it was clear he genuinely believed it. "What do you mean, watching you how?" I asked. Robert sat down on the edge of the chair opposite me. "For the past week, I've noticed things out of place in my house. A drawer left open, lights turned on when I know I turned them off. At first, I thought maybe I was just being careless. But then, last night, I saw a shadow moving past my window, and when I stepped outside, no one was there." The weight of his words hung in the room, and I felt the first prickle of unease. Our neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where kids rode their bikes on the sidewalks, where neighbors borrowed sugar from one another, and where crime was something we heard about on the news, not in our backyard. "Have you called the police?" I asked. Robert shook his head quickly. "No, I don't have any proof. They'd think I was paranoid. But Daniel, tonight I found something on my porch. A note, just 3 words. I see you." I leaned forward, my stomach tightening. "Do you have it with you?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. The handwriting was rough, uneven, almost as if the writer wanted to disguise their penmanship. And the message was just as he'd said. "I see you." Suddenly, I realized why he had come to me. He wasn't just frightened, he didn't want to face it alone. "All right," I said slowly, "let's figure this out together." And so began the strange chapter of my life where I became involved in something much bigger than I ever anticipated. That night, I walked back with Robert to his house. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the pavement, and though I tried to stay calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone really might be watching us. Robert's house was tidy, almost too tidy, like he kept it in perfect order to keep control over something in his life. He showed me where he had found the note, just tucked under the mat. As I stood there on his porch, I thought about the kind of person who would leave such a message. It wasn't just a prank, it had an edge of menace to it. Inside, we sat down at his kitchen table, and he poured us both a cup of coffee, though his hands trembled so much that some spilled on the counter. "Robert," I said, "is there anyone who might hold a grudge against you? Anyone from work, your past, maybe even here in the neighborhood?" He hesitated before answering. "Not that I can think of. I've always kept to myself." "But," he trailed off, staring into his cup. "But what?" I pressed gently. "There's this one thing," he admitted. "Back in the summer, when I first moved here, I kept noticing a man parked down the street. At first, I thought maybe he was just visiting someone. But it became a pattern. Same car, same man, just sitting there, sometimes for hours. When I finally walked up to ask if he needed something, he just drove away without saying a word. I haven't seen him in weeks, until 2 nights ago. I'm sure it was the same car." The room grew heavier with tension, and I realized this wasn't just about strange noises or misplaced objects. Someone had taken an interest in Robert, and not in a good way. From that night on, I began spending more time with him. We decided to keep watch together, alternating nights between our houses. It felt like something out of a suspense novel, two neighbors on alert, waiting for a clue, a face, anything that might explain the mystery. Then, about a week later, something happened that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. It was close to midnight when we both heard it, a soft but deliberate knock at Robert's back door. Not the front, where someone would normally approach, but the back, where the yard was shadowed and hidden from the street. Robert froze, his eyes wide. I motioned for him to stay quiet as I grabbed the flashlight he kept near the counter. Slowly, carefully, I opened the door and stepped outside. The yard was still, the only sound the distant hum of crickets. I swung the beam of light across the grass, the fence, the trees. Nothing. But when I looked down, I saw it, another note, this time pinned to the screen door with a small nail. It read, "You can't hide forever." I swallowed hard and called the police that time, even though Robert looked hesitant. They came, took the notes, and promised to patrol the area more frequently. But their skepticism was clear. Without a suspect or evidence beyond the notes, there wasn't much they could do. Still, Robert and I refused to let it go. Over the next few weeks, we set up small cameras around his property. We stayed up late, watching footage, comparing notes. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized Robert wasn't just some quiet neighbor, he was carrying the weight of something from his past, something he hadn't told me yet. And one cold night in December, he finally opened up. "Daniel," he said softly, staring at the glow of the surveillance screen, "there's something you should know. Back in college, I was part of a group that made some bad choices. We crossed paths with someone who swore he'd never forget what we did. I thought it was behind me. I thought moving here meant starting fresh. But what if he found me?" The revelation chilled me. Suddenly, the pieces started to fit together, the car, the notes, the feeling of being watched. Someone from Robert's past might have tracked him down, determined to settle an old score. But who, and why now? That was the question that haunted both of us as the days turned into weeks. The answer, when it finally came, was more shocking than either of us could have imagined.